Earlier this year, I was looking on Amazon Prime Video for a movie to watch. It's not often that I watch a movie, as it's not really the sort of an audiovisual medium that I tend to consume, but all the same, I had a look at what I could watch. And there was one thing that caught my eye. I ended up watching the 1984 David Lynch film Dune. I had heard how it wasn't exactly good, and how it's one of the few films David Lynch regrets making, but I had a decently fun time watching it. It felt like rather standard fare as science fiction films go for the time, and it had some pretty cool visual effects work. It also had a scene where Sting was just wearing what may as well be a jockstrap, so that's gotta be worth something. I watched this mostly as a lead up to the Denis Villeneuve adaptation that released in 2021, which by all accounts is a far more faithful adaptation despite only covering the first half of the original book, but I do have every intention of watching the second part when it eventually releases in cinemas. Now, what does this have to do with the topic of the video? Well, as I was starting to get slowly into it, I kept on seeing little references here and there to the Dune franchise. When I was watching Mandalore Gaming's reviews on the Homeworld games, I noticed he made a fair few references to Dune. Hell, he even lived through a strange episode in his life where he was dealing with incredibly noisy neighbours, just playing a particular section of one of the tracks from the 1984 movie soundtrack on repeat.
He's bumping them again and again.
Oh wait, they are chanting.
They're casting a fucking spell on me!
I think they're eating someone.
I also started watching a channel called Shut Up and Sit Down, a series of board game reviews, with one of the most popular videos on the channel being a review of the Dune board game.
I'm dressed as Paul Atreides with the kid who's from the Dune movie, so he's a pretty cool.
Another YouTuber I watch, Noodle, whose videos include elaborate animations in a variety of mediums including cardboard cutouts and hybridized 2D and 3D animation, uploaded a video about aspect ratios for film and television, and how screwy they are. The Villeneuve film was cited as an example regarding IMAX and its unique aspect ratio. And around the release of the Villeneuve film, I noticed in the local Waterstones an entire stand dedicated to different published versions of the Dune novels and other associated media. But I'd also noticed a lot of mention of the books online in numerous corners of the web, mainly through Reddit and Twitter. I guess what I'm trying to say is, in the space of about 6 months, I grew increasingly aware of the Dune franchise. Not so much because of the franchise itself, but because I had osmotically taken in so much of the franchise already that I thought I may as well jump right into reading the books, which I'm almost done with. But how come I started to hear so much about it? How come I ended up exposing myself to so much of the story, the lore, the characters, the setting and everything? How come I encountered all of that in such a short space of time? Well, this is where I go into the topic of this video: the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. So what is Baader-Meinhof exactly? Well, the name Baader-Meinhof itself is attached to a communist West German militant faction called the Baader-Meinhof Group, or Red Army faction. The group was named after two of its founders, Andreas Baader and Ulrike Meinhof. They were, by and large, a terrorist group, ideologically driven in their anti-imperialism and anti-fascism. They did gain some support from particularly radical left-wing people, but whenever they were in the news, it was often for some act they had performed against the lives of people ostensibly upholding authority in the area they happened to be in at the time. Although the two aforementioned founding members had been said to have taken their own lives as prisoners, despite this idea having some contention towards it, at the height of the Red Army's faction's notoriety, it was responsible for numerous attacks throughout not just West Germany, but other major locations in Europe, claiming the lives of 34 people. The Red Army faction lived on in a few phases, even long after the deaths of 3 of the 4 founding members, maintaining activity until 1998 when, years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the activities of extremist groups like the Red Army faction were becoming less tenable and more easily traceable. As a side note, in a rather huge quirk of fate, Horst Mahler, one of the original founders, seemingly abandoned his communist ideals and stack overloaded into fascism and Holocaust denial, and frequent incitement of Volksverhetzung. He's still alive to this day, although he suffered bouts of ill health in recent times, including an infection which required his leg to be amputated. You might be wondering, therefore, how this ties into anything. How does this tie into me seeing stuff about Dune appearing absolutely everywhere? Well, this is where we start to get into more psychological stuff, and it begins with a man named Terry Mullen. Writing on the St. Paul Pioneer Press online forum, Mullen, who wrote under the pseudonym Gigetto on Lincoln, detailed an anecdote in which he had heard about the Baader-Meinhof group in two separate and independent contexts, within 24 hours of one another. One in which he spoke about the group with a friend, and another in which his friend informed him of a recent newspaper article about the group. He began to refer to it as the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, and suggested to those reading the piece to use the term to refer to any uncommon name, theme or concept that appeared more than once in a relatively short space of time. This piece gained enough attention from the St. Paul Pioneer Press that they opted to print it as part of their Sunday bulletin board column. Following from this, letters from readers would be sent to the newspaper, each one detailing different examples for what would become dubbed the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. Up until this point though, it appeared to be more of a quirk of the inexplicable. Things just appear and there isn't an obvious reason for them appearing. But that leads us all the more to wonder why things are like that. This is where Professor Arnold Zwicky comes into this. He is a professor of the field of linguistics, having lectured at Stanford University as visiting professor, and is Distinguished University Professor Emeritus at Ohio State University. In 2005, he would coin a term that would give this phenomenon a more scientific tone: frequency illusion. He posited the idea that humans are easily misled by illusion, and that frequency illusion comes in the form of two separate biases. The first is selective attention bias. To put it simply, it refers to the idea that we notice things that are important and relevant to us, and we basically disregard everything else. Think of it like food or drink. We process the nutrients from it, and anything that's no longer useful to us leaves us. The other bias is confirmation bias. You may be more familiar with this one, where you actively seek things that confirm your current position and even bolster it, rather than searching for anything that may contradict or counteract it. In other words, people see what they want to see, and people believe what they want to believe. With that in mind, you may be wondering, therefore, how any of this really happens. Why is it that everything starts popping up out of the blue upon learning about this given thing? It's a strange thing, truth be told. Well, the strangest part of it all to me is that the whole thing is in our own heads. I made mention of Professor Zwicky's assessment that it taps into selective attention bias and confirmation bias, and that's exactly as it is. It's not the case that things just suddenly appear. In fact, they are already there. You've only just started noticing it. In the past, you may not have given much of a mind to anything to do with that thing. You may not have cared enough about it to give it much of a second glance, so you just went about your day without noticing it. One day, you'll encounter it, and for whatever reason, it grabs your attention, if for but a moment. You don't know why, but there's something about it that engages your brain in some way. Another day, you may notice that same thing being mentioned or encountered again. The seed is planted. Your awareness of it is greatly increased because it is more present in your mind. In actuality, that thing you encountered recently has likely always been there, just not present in your mind because it's just another shade of grey, something that doesn't catch your attention and you move on from. But now that the seed is planted, you start seeing it everywhere. You even subconsciously aim for it wherever you go, even if you don't realise that you do. The mind is very good at doing things without you realising it. Quite apart from my own experiences with this phenomenon, which, believe me, there have been a few, I've a few other anecdotal tales of this, starting with a relatively recent one a friend of mine has been having. A week or so ago, I sent a Twitter link to a friend on Discord, and it embedded an image of a branch of Jollibee that had opened somewhat recently in Leeds. For those who don't know, Jollibee is a chain of restaurants from the Philippines, with dishes derived from Western meals that, like a spaghetti dish with pieces of hot dog sausage in sauce and with melted cheese, as well as the staples of the brand including the Yum Burger and the Chicken Joy. It sounds stranger than it actually is, I assure you. Anyway, He made mention of the food they advertised on the front of the building, and I mentioned offhandedly that I was thinking of working on the script for this video. Little did he realise at that point though that he would be a part of the whole thing, thanks to a content creator he watches called Ordinary Sausage, who makes sausages of basically anything you could think of, including but not limited to a Jollibee chicken joint. On top of that, in his travels around Edinburgh and Glasgow, he encountered more branches of the restaurant even without actively aiming for them. What has happened here is now that he is aware of the existence of a Jollibee restaurant in Leeds, because of me sending a message about it, he ended up noticing more Jollibee restaurants and even their food. A few simpler, less specific examples of this might include another friend of mine frequently encountering the number 127. Numbers tend to be a somewhat common subject. In fact, one of the more notable early examples of this was that of the number 23. Another example could involve personal circumstances. Say for example that you're moving house and you're making use of vans and trucks to move things between places. Ever paid any notice to how many more moving vans there are now? Giving the impression that more people are moving than there actually are? Or maybe imagine that you're buying a new car or article of clothing and you start seeing an increasing number of people with that car or article of clothing. It becomes something you can scarcely avoid seeing. And I guess a lesser example of this is one of my favourite albums, Laughingstock by Talk Talk. Early on in my travels in listening to this band's music, I didn't know about this album, and when I decided to check it out, I was surprised by how otherworldly it was. It was nothing like their earlier synthpop stuff like It's My Life. But then I found more and more things about this particular album, and I saw people posting about how they love it, and even saw Anthony Fantano review it, and found myself realising that for as strange an album as this is, maybe it's not as obscure as I assumed it to be. An article written by Martin van der Mullen, a Master of Science in Linguistics at Radboud University Nijmegen, discusses the concept of frequency illusion as it refers to Dutch prescriptivism, the idea of codifying and enforcing particular grammatical and spelling rules in a language so as to have one proper way of using the language. Using data from descriptivist literature from as far as over a century ago, van der Mullen noticed that much of the language used in some of the books suggested that certain terms and ideas had been determined much later than they actually were, which is a case of recency illusion, another Zwickian illusion where the mind encounters something that is believed to be more recent in origin than it actually is. One example of frequency illusion within this article is that of condemned variants of given words or phrases, where prescriptivists regard one particular way of saying something as being incorrect. Of the 18 items given, only one had a condemned variant be used more than 73% of the time, with 7 items having a frequency of below 5%. In the end, we are prone to biases in our daily lives, whether we realise it or not. Van der Mullen concludes with the notion that Zwicky himself said, "We are indeed eluded."